Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is our topic today, and my name is, I'll start with my name. I am Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am owner of Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, which I just started this past year. And it's been really exciting for me. One of the things that I have hoped that I would always be able to do, actually when I first started thinking about my career, is I always really wanted to be able to bring what we are learning scientifically to the average person. And so I'm hoping that I really think that this is an exciting time for me because I'm able to really do that, which is a heart's desire of mine. It's a dream of mine. Hopefully you've added your name and your email to the chat. It always helps me be able to get a hold of you afterwards and send out the link for these videos. I don't put them out for everybody to see. I put them out really for my attendees, and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to do with them afterwards. So I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know, I have a PhD in psychology, and very specifically, it's in social, cognitive, and developmental psychology. What I think that this does for me is it makes me better able to understand really the science behind the way that we think. And I think that that then better prepares me to be a better therapist. Um, some of you know I had no intention of being a therapist, but the reason why I am is because I've been volunteering for the last 3 or 4 years for a specific type of therapy, just because I wanted to volunteer for it, and I found out that this is an amazing therapy. So, but part of this to me is that I am better able to be able to put into people's hands the information that they need to help them get healthier. My area of expertise is in positive psychology. And positive psychology is teaching certain character strengths and virtues in order to better our lives, because we find that these things that we are kind of taught in Sunday school actually are springboards to better mental and physical health, is what we know. So we're going to take a look a little bit more closely at self-esteem today. My objectives are similar, and as you join me, I hope more and more of you join me and look for my monthly presentations that I'll be doing. What you'll notice about my presentations is that they vary. Sometimes I will talk more about the mental health aspect. Sometimes I'll talk more about the physical health aspect. And sometimes I'll talk more about the spiritual. I talked in December more about spiritual. Prior to that, there was some more physical and a mental health one that I talked about. Today, it's one of my favorite topics, self-esteem. And even if you have had like your fill of topics on self-esteem, I really hope that I can give you a little bit different perspective of it that can really benefit you in the long run. It's my favorite topic because when I first started in psychology, I came across a person whose name is Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman actually had looked at a lot of psychology from a mental illness perspective, but realized that that wasn't helping the majority of individuals. And so what he did was he took his actual research in pessimism and turned that research into optimism. And also what he was able to do also that really was key for me was to make then practical applications of what he was learning about these positive character strengths. So practical applications. And his first practical application of this was actually in self-esteem. So in 1998, Martin Seligman gave a speech to APA, the American Psychological Association, where he introduced the new discipline of positive psychology. And the way he introduced it was he talked about this epidemic that we have in particular here in the United States, but this epidemic of violence and actually an epidemic of depression. And the reason why he suggested that we have those is because we have falsely injected individuals with self-esteem. Now, let me talk to you just a little bit about what that means. What does that mean? Well, in the 1980s, some of you have been around for this. In the 1980s, we began studying self-esteem because what we found was that everything is related to self-esteem. Everything is related to self-esteem. So, drug use is related to self-esteem. Teen pregnancy is related to self-esteem. Academic success is related to self-esteem. Leadership is related to self-esteem. How many friends I have is related to self-esteem. Loneliness is related to self-esteem. And we literally had tens of thousands of research articles demonstrating the relationship with all between self-esteem and all of these many characteristics, right? Some of them positive, some of them negative characteristics, but they were all related to self-esteem. Well, if everything is related to something, that tells us basically nothing about that topic, really. We have no, if everything's related to self-esteem, it tells us nothing about self-esteem, right? And so what researchers then began to do is they began to take a look at the relationship between self-esteem and violence. And many of my students know this. I always use the example of bullies. And what we know is that bullies typically have high self-esteem, not low self-esteem. And this is surprising to a lot of people. Because why would I bully somebody if I felt good about myself, right? So this is a surprise to a lot of people, but we found out that bullies have high self-esteem. But the key here is, and I want you to pay attention to this history because this is key for you now and how you want to take a look at your self-esteem. Intuitively, that doesn't make any sense. Intuitively, it doesn't make any sense that bullies have high self-esteem. Why would they put people down? But that's what the research showed. And so you can kind of see there can be flaws in our research. It doesn't make any sense. What they found was this. They found that the self-esteem actually for these individuals, bullies, was fragile. We called it fragile, or we call it unstable self-esteem. What we did was we measured this by using what's a method that's called the experience sampling method. I'll just tell you quickly because it's very interesting. So what we do is we beat, it used to be called the beeper method. We would beat people throughout the day and we would ask them, what are you doing and how do you feel? Now, if I gave a bully a self-esteem measure, and you can look at that on my website. I have a self-esteem measure on my website for you to take a look at just to see in my videos. But if I gave a bully a self-esteem measure, the bully would say, yeah, I think I'm great. Yeah, I think I'm talented. Yeah, I think I'm smart. Yeah, I think I'm worldly. We can hear bullies say this, right? So a measure of self-esteem is not really getting to the real self-esteem. But when we did the beeper method throughout the day and we checked them throughout the day, we found that bullies were very aggravated with people, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this person is so stupid. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this person just cut me off. Oh my gosh, I can't believe. So actually, we're finding that throughout the day, bully's self-esteem was not high, it was fragile. It was being influenced by events throughout the day. So that's what we want, right? We want to make sure that our self-esteem is not influenced by events throughout the day. We want to have stable self-esteem. And that's kind of what I helped, I kind of was the bait for you to come here, was to say, how can I really get some real stable self-esteem? Okay. So what we do, what you'll see is I will look at these topics from a scientific perspective. You're going to hear some research here. I hope that you love research. I do. It's my evidence for what I have to say. Okay. The second perspective that I look at, and I say humanistic, and the reason why I say humanistic is this, because a humanistic perspective really is a human perspective, that we have certain ways that may not be beneficial, right? May not be beneficial, but certain ways that we learn to do things. We want to talk about that from a humanistic. What are our tendencies, right? Sometimes science doesn't tell us everything we need to know about self-esteem. Okay. What are our tendencies? We need to look at that. And then I put down from a spiritual or godly perspective, because I always believe that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. If you want to take a look at it from a scientific perspective, a holistic perspective, we call it Gestalt psychology is what it's called, little from 1800s actually. But the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think it's necessary to see what is beyond simply our senses, because if we didn't do that with self-esteem, we might just be happy with the idea that bullies have high self-esteem, right? We need to look at the bigger picture. Okay, all right. And then so we already talked about the history already, so we've got that objective out of the way. Now, I wanted to highlight some topics in my series, because if you didn't know, or you somehow weren't aware, what I want you to know is that this is the first time what I've done is I have put together a series on self-esteem, and a series on anything. This is my first series on anything that I put together. And this is my series on self-esteem that I did. And I enjoy doing this, and I'm going to do this more often. I think, actually, heads up, I think the next one I'm going to do is going to be on sexuality. Okay, so look at that. So what I did was I put together 5 short videos here, and you can find them on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. 5 short videos. The longest one is the last one that I did here on entity versus mastery, which is a 10-minute video. That one, we get down to some real meat in that video. Now, I'm not here to repeat what I put in those videos. What I'm here to do is just really kind of give you the glue to put some of these concepts together. So again, you can have what I consider to be stable, long-lasting self-esteem. And it really can be done. It really can be done. Okay, so, and then we want to take a look at the health aspects. This is healthy mind, body, spirit. And so we always need to be making sure that we're concentrating on the health aspect of this as well. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to go back just a little bit. So with the self-esteem that Seligman was talking about, he's saying that what we have been doing as parents, because all of us know that you need self-esteem to be healthy. Okay, we've learned it. That's what I know. And as a parent, what am I going to do? I'm going to give you self-esteem. Okay. And no matter what, I'm going to do that for you. I know I can do that. I know I can make you feel better, right? And you think about all the ways, maybe you weren't around and maybe you don't know in the 80s and 90s that we did this. But I do know that you feel the ramifications of this kind of mindset, that I need to inject my child with self-esteem, whether or not they have earned it, because I don't want them getting pregnant out of wedlock. I don't want them using drugs. I don't want them joining a gang because they don't feel good about themselves. In fact, I don't want them to have to worry about anything, right? So I make sure that I never tell them something that they can't do. And I make sure that I never tell them that something that they're not good at, right? I make sure that in every statement I'm making, I'm building their self-esteem. And this is where we have helicopter parents, right? Helicopter parents who are trying to do everything that they can to make sure that their children don't suffer, okay? But what we find is that individuals then have self-esteem that is built on what I call a foundation of sand, of quicksand is what it is, right? And when you think about that foundation of quicksand, that could be for all kinds of things that you have in your life, right? Where you no longer have whatever it takes to do whatever you need. That can be in your career, right? So you don't have what it takes. It can be in your relationships, that that person can't criticize me and be an equal partner where they're helping me grow because I can't take the criticism, right? That could mean that I give up on talents and things that I enjoy. It could mean that I don't even know the things that I really enjoy. I don't even know what I enjoy. Why? Because I've never had to really work to find out what it is I'm actually willing to work for. Why? Because we had helicopter parents. That's the reason why. Okay, and then what ends up happening? And I use this picture a little bit throughout. So, because I want you to take a look at it. I think there's a few, all right, it's a silly little cartoon, whatever, but it gives you just a little picture of what's going on here, okay, and what can happen in our minds, all right? So here we have this woman in the center there. So what ends up happening now is I become the center of the universe, right? I become the center of my parents' world. I become the center of the universe. And you're not supposed to, you are supposed to make that a reality for me. You're supposed to be contributing to that reality that I have, right? Of who I am. And what that then creates are these specific ways that we want to look at the world. That's my video on biases, okay? Specific ways that we choose to look at the world. But what we end up missing when we have the spotlight on us, I feel good about myself, I've got that self-esteem, right? But what? But I am missing what we call grit. I have missed the opportunities in order to work hard for who I am. And in that work, what I create is self identity. One of the things that we are missing right now with our younger generation is they don't know who they are. And they don't know who they are relative to their careers. They don't know who they are relative to what they're supposed to be in their relationships or what their values are or what their beliefs are. They don't know who they are very often, not everybody, right? Who they are sexually. We have a lot of sexual confusion, right? That's going on because sexuality, maybe in part, is introduced at very young ages. And if sexuality, how can I know who I am sexually when it's introduced before I even become a sexual human being? We have lots of opportunities to find out who we are that have been taken away from us by our helicopter parents, okay? Now, that's not all of us. That's not the story for all of us. But I'm trying to feed you slowly some problems and solutions, okay? Now, some of us have a different story, okay? Okay, so this is an article that's called Optimism, the Double-Edged Sword by Paul Rayburn. And it's a real great article. I'm going to read it right here from this. I'm just going to read about this person. I always like to have a little example of people in my stories that you could relate to. Maybe you're not the person who could relate to the helicopter parents. Maybe you're the person who could relate to Brian. Okay, so who's Brian? With every new act, Brian distanced himself from the past. His father, explosive and often unemployed, had pounded him with names like moron and jerk. His life on the streets beyond the family's Bronx apartment had been difficult too. One of just a few white kids in a neighborhood of Hispanics and blacks, he felt he had to be macho and tough. It's no wonder that Brian wanted to be a writer. He had stories to tell. But he also had issues, including a glaring lack of self-esteem. Still, he had fight in him. He plugged through college, earned a PhD in literature, and secured a coveted professorship at a university. In the wife he chose, cultured and moneyed, in the way he vacationed, Hampton's 1 year, Greek islands the next. In the books he read, literary, experimental, Brian disposed of his prior self, layer by layer, as if he were shedding skin. But the core remained, so he began writing a book about life in the hood. The more he took on, the more he compensated for his insecurity with braggadocio, eventually insisting his novel, always a work in progress, would win a Pulitzer Prize. Read this, it's genius, he said, pushing passages on friends, ignoring the voice inside that whispered, this writing is bad. Yet Brian was gifted, was in fact gifted. A top New York publisher finally bought his novel, fulfilling his lifelong dream. But for Brian, it proved too much. At first, he just seemed depressed, says former wife Meg, who witnessed a tailspin. But depression turned into alcoholism, then obesity, and finally heart disease. When the book came out, Brian was too ill to go on tour. Brian's downfall seems counterintuitive. Shouldn't success bring happiness, boosting the immune system and improving our overall health? Not according to research from psychologists at Duke. Enormous success is healthy only for people with self-esteem to match it, it turns out. For someone struggling with a poor self-image like Brian, hitting a ball out of the park may tax the immune system, helping the body to spiral into disease. Instead, says Duke scientist, the Brians among us stay healthier when success is more modest and slower to arrive. So we see here that the concept of self-esteem is a very complex concept. On the one hand, we can't have parents who are giving us everything, right? We need to create some kind of grit or diligence in ourselves and in our lives. We see that that's important. On the other hand, we also see that somebody who forces us to be gritty and gritty and gritty all the time, right? Pushing us in ways that can really damage us. We see that that's not healthy either. So what we're trying to understand here is sort of this healthy balance. If you go on into this article here, a little bit further into this article, this is called the sweat boost here, and how it talks about how we need to build certain resistance, but that resistance isn't necessarily built with great big traumatic experiences that can take us out. We can build resistance in our immune system, in our minds, in our bodies with just healthy sorts of doses of this sweat, right? Pushing our bodies just a little bit, a healthy dosage of this sweat. And that goes really a long way when we're talking about a lot of things. It's even a great example when we're talking about exercise. Relative to exercise, we should not be exercising for more than 30 minutes, real intense exercise. That's the best exercise. We have a lot of people who do a lot more than that and consistently breaking down the body. It's no different than trauma on your body. Now, there are things, there's always a balance. There's always a balance. Sometimes I need to break down that muscle, right, in order to build it up in a better, stronger way. Same thing with our self-esteem. Sometimes those traumatic events actually build us up. Even though they can take us down, they can sometimes build us up in a better, faster kind of way, right? Improving ourselves. So, what do we know about self-esteem? A little bit about a definition of self-esteem. Self-esteem actually is, we call it a sociometer. And a sociometer for self-esteem means that I use other people's our social world. I use other people to determine my self-esteem. All right, danger, danger, right? Danger, danger. If I'm using my dad to determine my self-esteem and my dad is calling me moron and jerk, that's kind of not going to help my self-esteem, right? And even if I use somebody like a helicopter parent, to be able to determine my self-esteem. That's not good either, right? Because it says I have somebody who's always going to feed my self-esteem, right? So using, and if I use social media as my meter, that can be very dangerous as well. The meter determines whether or not we feel included or not. Are we included? That's our meter, right? Then what do? No, no, we're not included. That equals to be pain. I feel pain. And what that does is it forces me to change my behavior. When I feel, right, uh, that I am not fitting in, I change my behavior. Now, some of us can change our behaviors in ways that are healthy, right? I can think that person is important to me, or that person isn't important to me. Okay. There are ways I can change that are healthy. But very often, what ends up happening, especially with today's generation, is that we end up getting overloaded by the fact that I may not feel included, whether or not I care about that group, right? We go on social media, and whether or not I care about that group is making me feel included or not included. And then this overloads me with social anxiety, is what it does. Okay. What we need to determine is whether or not that inclusion is important. Right now, we have so much that's tapping into our self-esteem between the pandemic and isolation and rules and regulations that we have, right? And pressures from relationships and pressures to be able to learn in classrooms where we're not learning in the same way. All of these pressures, I have to determine what is important to me. And the key there is knowing who I am privately as well as publicly. Knowing who I am privately as well as publicly. Privately, some of these people's opinion don't matter to me at all. So publicly, why am I investing so much time into it then, right? What that ends up doing is, what I did here was the cognitive distortions when I feel this kind of social anxiety become greater and greater. My cognitive distortions become greater and greater. Why? Because emotions are high and cognitions are low. That means, what do I have to do? I have to distort all kinds of reality, from what my parents think of me, to what my boyfriend thinks of me, to what my professor thinks of me, to what my boss thinks of me, for me to feel better. Because now it's dependent on what? A meter that's outside of me. Other people, other opinions, social media. It's, I have to distort what's going on because my self-esteem is dependent on people outside of me. Okay. And that makes me, as we can see here, very sad. That's a sad face. Okay. Now we want to know, when is this really a problem? When does this really border on things like, I better see a therapist and I better start seeing what I can do about this, because it's a problem. Okay. And what we call that in this therapy that I do, and it's very valuable for you whether or not you care about my therapy, and that is this concept of being triggered. So when I don't know what I value, what's important to me, that I become so overloaded by the opinions of so many other people, it creates high levels of anxiety to me. I might have an overreaction. The problem can be a very small problem. Somebody dissed me on social media. Somebody doesn't have the same political opinion that I have, right? Somebody told me I might not be good at my job. Boy, that could feel like a kick in the gut from the right person at the right time, can't it? Right? Not good at my job. That can feel like a kick in the gut, right? How do I react to that? do I have? Do I take a $5 problem and turn it into a $5,000 problem? Okay. That might indicate things like my meter isn't functioning like it should. Okay. My sociometer. So let's readjust our sociometer then. That's what we need to do. Okay, this slide here is, I want to show you, I want to talk to you just a little bit about the health outcomes. There are always detrimental health outcomes when we feel this unnecessary anxiety and pressure. And in particular, I thought, because of the self-esteem issue that we're talking about, and because this pandemic and this isolation is really affecting many of us and how we feel about ourselves, I want you to take a look at specifically the health outcomes for individuals on their immune system when they are feeling lonely. Okay, so what this is this is gene expression. I'm going to say that, and these are gene expressions that we can take from actual genes. What we do is we raise the stress levels of individuals, and then we look at what that stress does to our DNA. And this is actually a portion of our genetic coding, is what it is, that's related to our immune system. And hopefully you can see here that we have it separated between individuals who are isolated and individuals who are integrated, is what we call them. So, all right, we're using fancy words. Lonely people and social people is what we're talking about. Okay, and these are gene expressions. And on the left side, these are elevating. This is on the left side is disease. This is determining disease on the left side, and on the right side, these are gene expressions. They just divided these trays up, is what they did. These are gene expressions that are related to decreases in disease, so health, better health. So one of the things that we can see here relative to gene expression is that we have exact opposite expressions for when we're talking about immune responses. Here is what we're looking at. The immune response, we have exact opposite immune responses for individuals who are lonely and individuals who are social. All right, that's kind of a big deal now, right? Exactly the opposite responses. And what we see here is that green is upregulated, that individuals who are isolated have a tendency, genetically speaking, when they are stressed, they increase disease and decrease their immune functioning. Upregulate disease on the left side, down-regulate health is what they end up doing. And the opposite is for social individuals. Social individuals down-regulate disease when they're stressed, and they upregulate health, right? Or upregulate health and decreasing of diseases for individuals who are integrated or social individuals. I presented this before. It's one of the most important slides, I think, that I present to my students ever. And that is this. This demonstrates that when individuals have problems like depression or anxiety or OCD or bipolar or those kinds of things, or they are violent, all kinds of social personality traits, no matter what they are, what we know is, and this is what this is showing, that what we need in order to have increases in depression here is what they are doing. So self-reported depression, major depressive symptoms that they have here. And this is actually demonstrating the same kind of thing, only for antisocial behavior that we have all the way to the right here. Which each one of these slides are demonstrating is that we need a element of the environment, like Brian's father, in order for Brian to be majorly depressed. It is not simply an outcome of genes. And this is very important to me. It's very important to me because what I see very often is I see that students end up putting themselves in boxes relative to, or many people, not just students, many people put themselves and are comfortable putting themselves in boxes relative to any kind of diagnosis. And this, I feel, is very dangerous, because what it does is it creates a perception of who you are. I'm going to give you an example of this. um, I have had people in therapy who have come to me and they have had diagnoses of being, for example, ADHD, for example. And they come to me, and I have known them prior to a diagnosis of ADHD and after a diagnosis of ADHD. And what I see sometimes is that people begin to act in ways that define their mental illness. So all of a sudden, a student who was not distracted before becomes distracted because they see themselves in this kind of box, right? They see themselves as being a person with ADHD. And that's very dangerous. What we want to do is we want to change our perception, because perception is so much from things that are threatening us, like the pandemic, like being isolated, to things that, to the same event challenging us to find new ways to express our love, to find new ways to connect to other people, right? To find wonderful things that that we're able to do on the internet that help our careers, for example, right? It's just sometimes a matter of perception. What we have here are individuals who have healthy immune systems in the blue, and it didn't matter whether or not they had a perception of any event as challenging or threatening. They were healthy in their positive emotions and their cardiovascular abilities, strength, basically. It was the individuals who perceived things as threatening that affected their health. So perception has so much to do with our health. What are 5 interesting facts about the brain? I wanted to put these out there for you. First of all, brain degeneration is a myth. It's a myth. As long as we keep our brains going, they do not degenerate. Exercise increases the size of your brain. We need to do healthy exercises in order to do that. Anxiety damages the brain. And this is the reason really for this list of 5. I wanted to include the other 4, but the big one here for self-esteem is that when we feel this anxiety, it literally damages and deteriorates our brain. So we want to try and perceive things in a different light. Working for too long is counterproductive. It's similar to exercising too much. And then the last one there is that your brain can change, that we can develop these kinds of strategies that can help us change our brain and change the way that we perceive ourselves. One of the things that we do is we know that when we experience trauma, no matter what, we will have a change in perception. No matter what, we will have a change in our relationships. No matter what, we will have a change in our life priorities. It just depends on how you choose to perceive, how you choose to relate, how you choose to prioritize, that can make this trauma healthy, literally healthy for you. The grit that we're talking about, right? Turning your trauma into grit. You literally can change your trauma into something healthy depending on those 3 things. What do we want to do? We want to make meaning out of our traumatic experience, making sense out of it. Why did this happen to me? What could I have done differently? Making sense out of it, and then finding the benefit in going through it. That changes our perception. It changes our relationships. It changes our priorities. One of the things that I use as an example with my class is the example of my ex-husband and his relationship with his dad. And at a time where he had a lot of traumatic events coming upon him at one time. He lost his job, and I hope I'm okay, Stuart. And his dad got sick and actually ended up dying shortly during that period of time. But had he not lost his job, At that time, he would have never had the time with his dad. So you can say, oh dear goodness gracious, all the weight of the world is coming down upon me, right? Or you can take a look at some of those things as a time to change my priorities, which is exactly what he did, and build relationships, which was an important time for him to do that. So there are all kinds of crises we go through. We can take a look at our perspective in order to make it a healthy outcome for us. Okay, here it says we suffer less post-loss distress. Here, I want to point this out, only when occurring during the first year. That means that we need to make meaning making in the first year. We have to create a habit. If we don't start meaning making and finding purpose and making sense out of this, the damage is going to happen to us. So we need to be able to do that within the first year. We also want to have an optimistic attitude that if I do these and make purpose out, meaning and purpose out of this, it's going to work for me. And also individuals who have a religious or spiritual orientation really find it easier for them to make sense out of it or to find meaning and benefit in it. I want to talk, I like to talk about the health rewards that we have here, some important rewards, because we can change and train our brain. So I want to point to just three important reward centers of our brain. And I'm going to show you how these things work a little bit. So we've got three neurotransmitters that reward our brain and make us feel good. I'm going to start with the second one there, which is serotonin. Many of us know that serotonin is, we use that in antidepressants to regulate depression. I hope that you go to my website. I have some information on how antidepressants actually work. And I hope that you take a look at that, because antidepressants do not work like our bodies actually work. And if they don't work like our bodies work, it's hard for us to expect a healthy outcome if we don't know if the pharmaceutical is not working like our body actually works. Okay, so what does serotonin do? Serotonin actually, and that's what we're looking at here, serotonin actually regulates mood is what it does. It doesn't necessarily make us less depressed, but it does help us regulate mood. And serotonin, how do we get serotonin? Serotonin is 90% of serotonin is made in our guts. So we have to look at our diet first if we want to regulate serotonin and our mood. Talk to me about nutrition if you want to know more about what you need to do to regulate your nutrition to help you get more serotonin in your diet. Okay, see me and talk to me about that. The other thing, the other neurotransmitter that's an important neurotransmitter is dopamine. Now, how do we activate dopamine? Dopamine is so cool. It's my favorite neurotransmitter. How do we regulate dopamine or activate dopamine? With anticipation. And if we create in our daily goals, in our daily activity, anticipation, we then stimulate dopamine. I can do that by setting goals. The closer I get to a goal, the more I anticipate the reward and the more dopamine. Set a date. I've talked about this before with people. Set a date, right? A date with somebody that I've been dying to see and date. The closer I get to that magic date that I'm going to have, you know, the butterflies you feel in your stomach when you're getting closer to that, right? That's dopamine. What dopamine does is it creates a motivation for reward. So the next time I set a goal, I am more motivated. I remember the dopamine, right? I remember that feeling, and it motivates me to get the dopamine. Beta endorphins. Beta endorphins actually regulate pain. So what do? We get the beta endorphins stimulated when we run, when we exercise. We get a runner's high is what we do, and we don't feel the pain of that marathon. Why? Because beta endorphins reduce pain. So things like exercise and stimulation brings on the endorphins, and those endorphins, the adrenaline, that's adrenaline, and that reduces pain for us. Okay, so important reward centers. How do we do this? How do we increase this self-esteem so we can get all the benefits that we need? I always tell my students we need to know our strengths and we need to know our weaknesses. And how do we do that? We are true to ourselves, true to our goals, true to our desires, true to finding out who we are, true to our identity. Okay, true to who we were made to be mentally, physically, spiritually. Who were we made to be? And when we seek that out, what we end up doing is we end up then removing the distractions of all those things that are creating our sociometer to go over the edge, right? When we know ourselves, we reduce all of that white noise creating the anxiety. Okay, so what do we need to do then? I'm going to get down to the strategies and then that's it. We're going to wrap it up. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, the first thing is we need, who do you use for comparison? Are you always comparing yourself to other people? Or do you compare yourself to yourself? And when you compare yourself to yourself, you are better able to see your progress. And what we call that is mastery, right? So here, this person only cares about improving themselves with their guitar. They don't care about what Jimi Hendrix does or Eddie Van Halen does. They only care about what they do for a guitar, how they play. So the key here is, in my little short commercial, the key here is figure out, know yourself, know your strengths, right? So you can master something then. And when you master something, what it prevents is this feeling of helplessness. I talk more about that in my 5th video on entity versus mastery if you want to know more about that. But if I take my energy and put my energy into something that's not a strength, that isn't my talent, I'm going to spin my wheels and give up. If my definition for mastery is that I'm better than I was yesterday, I will continue to try. Okay? So those are keys to building your self-esteem. So, keys. Who do you use for comparison? Using yourself as a comparator leads to mastering a skill. Okay? When you use others, there are going to be times where we use others in comparison, when we compare ourselves to others. When you use others, note who you are using. If you want to be a basketball player and you use Michael Jordan, that's okay. That's okay. Because in my mind, I'll never be Michael Jordan anyway. So I can look at his talents and things. But if I use somebody who's just slightly above me, upward comparison, that's only slightly above me, then I'm kind of jealous. Sometimes I could be jealous. Who are you comparing yourself to? Pay attention. Are you always using downward comparisons? You compare yourself to somebody below you. You denigrate them. That's not going to give you real self-esteem. Self-esteem is not built on putting somebody down. Self-esteem is on knowing your strengths and weaknesses too, okay? And then note your feelings. Do they represent private feelings? What do I mean by that? I mean that when you go to your social media and you compare yourself to somebody and you see that this person has a mansion, do you care about having a mansion? When you see that this person is able to take vacations because they have no children and can afford all kinds of things, Is that the life you want? So you compare yourself to who you are in private, your private self, the things that are most important to you, not your public self, the things that are less important, right? So look at those things that are important to you. And then I have a couple things, right? We're 21, time to reboot. I always have been a proponent of being an adult, of being an adult. So what else can we do to get our self-esteem at this adult level? Like I said, get to know your strengths as opposed and your weaknesses. This way nobody could really tap into a wound and trigger you into a $5,000 reaction because you already know, because you already know. Okay. And then capitalize on those strengths so that you are not spinning your wheels and doing something that's not part of your skill set, right? How do I have long-term self-esteem? I master something that I'm made to master that will give me then all of those great rewards going on with every goal that I set. Okay? All right. I always have information about being healthy. I've talked to you, if you've seen my videos on my liver gallbladder cleanse. You have this PowerPoint there if you want to get started. That's how you get started. And I'll put a little video on my Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit about what I'm doing. I haven't shopped yet because I was preparing for this. So today, for my first day for my healthy cleanse, because we want to reboot our bodies. Just quickly, I'm going to tell you, when I first started selling Shaklee, the reason why I sold Shaklee in this nutrient body portion of it was because I was having skin problems like I never had. And I could say all kinds of things about that. Like I'd never had skin problems, and for me to have skin problems was really detrimental. I had to stand in front of a class and those kinds of things. And what took care of them was I had to do a full cleanse is what I did. I had to do a good cleanse, and it took care of so many things. So now I do them on a regular basis. So getting started with 2021, I want to get you started with healthy self-esteem, and I want to get you, which will give you a healthy mind and a healthy body and a healthy spirit. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much. And so I'm going to stop the share. And if anyone thought of any questions, please email me if you have questions and thoughts about self-esteem or different ways that you think maybe you've thought about it and you maybe would just like a little bit of advice. Also, I want to tell you that if you do have a group and you are looking at possibly needing somebody to present on some of these topics, I know that now that everybody's, stuck in their whatever they're stuck in with this pandemic, that sometimes we don't know what to do with our time. And so I'm here if you want me to talk to a group. I just started talking about this, but I will. I'll talk to your group on any topic, psychologically speaking, nutritionally, or even spiritually speaking. All right, so that's all I have. Thanks so much for your time.